Frank! Frank! Hurry! Mr. Bergeron's on. Don't forget the popcorn, Frank.
Coming, dear.
Hello. Thank you all for coming. My name is Arthur Bergeron. I'm an attorney. I work at Myrick O'Connell. There are a bunch of us, 55 of us. We've got offices in Westboro and Worcester. A bunch of people from Northborough work there. Todd Helwig, Joe Hamilton, I think Rich Van Nostrand, and Diane Powers, who some of you know, actually runs Myrick O'Connell, although she's not an attorney. She does it all. So I'm the elder law person. The reason why we are here this evening, this is in some ways an ad for the other speakers. I am doing these presentations in conjunction with folks from the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Association and Shelby Marshall, who has a business, her day job. She has a business as a home care person, but she's on the Alzheimer's Partnership, is here to talk about the Alzheimer's Association. And I'm also doing this with Bay Path Elder Services. Bay Path Elder Services, how many of you here have heard of Bay Path Elder Services? Raise your hands. Though this is a good introduction for you. Bay Path Elder Services is the entity, it's called an ASAP, an Aging Services Access Point. It is the nonprofit entity that services 14 communities, including this one, and in those communities is basically the funnel through which all federal and state elder services money comes, including, in many cases, the Mass Health money. So if I could tell you anything as kind of the lesson of this presentation, it's you want to be their friend, right? At Bay Path Elder Services. They provide a variety of services, and they're going to be, and Mary Frayne Johnston, who from Bay Path, is going to be talking about some of those as they relate to tonight's topic. So we talked about and agreed to do a set of 3 presentations regarding Alzheimer's. The first one talking to issues with folks who are worried about it. You're worried about it. You don't necessarily have it, right? You don't necessarily know somebody that, or you probably know somebody who has it. It's like everybody seems to know somebody, but you're worried about it. And we wanted to talk about the things that you may want to do and the things you probably need to know about if you want to reduce your chances of getting Alzheimer's in the future, and if you want to just plan for it. And so that's the purpose of tonight's discussion. In the second presentation, we're going to be talking about early stages, Alzheimer's in its early, or dementia in its early stages. Also, many people hear those 2 terms, Alzheimer's and dementia, and think, so is that are those 2 different things? Or what is that? Dementia is not a disease. Dementia is a set of symptoms. Symptoms that we all see and that we associate with Alzheimer's. Cognitive symptoms, some physical symptoms. Alzheimer's is the greatest single cause of dementia. Yeah, something like 80% of folks with dementia have it because of Alzheimer's, but they might also have it because of something called Lewy body disease, or because of Parkinson's, or a number of other things, right? So in the second presentation, we're going to be talking about dementia in its early stages, especially that caused by Alzheimer's, and kind of how to deal with that. And then in the third one, we're really going to talk about folks who have dementia in the later stages. And in all of these cases, we're going to be kind of focusing on planning to stay home, because that's really kind of the goal of everybody. I know so much of the work that I do as an elder law attorney is around Alzheimer's. It's people who are worried about it. It's people who have got it, who know somebody or have a loved one who has it. And they're worried about this whole cluster of issues. And their biggest goal is to stay out of a nursing home and to stay home, right? So the goal of this really is to try to figure out how to stay home. So Frank and Mary are the couple that I often talk about. They own a house. They're make-believe. Well, they're kind of make-believe. They're becoming real. I've been talking about them for so many years. But they own a house. It's worth $300,000. It was going down. Now it's going back up in value. They're very excited. Frank has a small IRA, $150,000. They have a joint annuity of $100,000. They've got savings of $75,000. They've got total assets of $625,000. Frank gets 2 checks. He gets a Social Security check of $1,500 a month, and he's got a small pension. So he's got total of income of $500. Mary gets $750 a month, so their total income is $2,750, right? That's not big money, but it's not nothing, so it's a little over $30,000 a year. Their mortgage is paid. They're basically going to be okay as long as a disaster does not befall them. And their estate plan is very simple. They have 3 children, Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr., and their goal in life is they want to live until they die in their house. They want to be buried in the backyard, and then if one of them dies, they want everything to go to the other one, and then after that, they want it to be divided up among their kids. Does any of this sound familiar, right? This is kind of where a lot of people are. So oftentimes, and so they're going to be okay. As a matter of fact, while physically they're not going to be great if they have heart problems or cancer, financially they're going to be okay, right? Because Medicare is going to cover all that, right? Medicare, the point of Medicare, when it was created back in the 60s, was to help old people not go broke. In 1960, before Medicare was adopted, over 30%, I think it was 32% of all people in this country over age 60 were defined as were poor. Right now, that number is 7%. 7%. The major reason is Medicare, because in the old days, of course, older people could never get health insurance. So if you had any kind of serious disease, bad enough that you had the disease, you also went broke. Today, that only happens if you have Alzheimer's or one of those other things that causes dementia, because while Medicare will pay for, if you've got cancer, they'll pay for biopsies and operations and chemo and all kinds of things, right? Or if you have heart problems, you know, you're going to get stents and this and that. But if you need help dressing at home or going to the bathroom because you've got dementia, you're out of luck, because Medicare does not cover the cost of so-called non-skilled care, and that's what all of that stuff is about, right? So for Frank and Mary, the big concern is typically about what happens if I get Alzheimer's, or really, what happens if I get dementia. Now, as I tell folks, as I've told Frank and Mary many times, and I'm telling you, when people will say to me, well, what do I need for legal documents? Really, you only need 2, and I'm telling you this now, and they are very simple: a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy. The only 2 things that you really need are the documents that will help somebody else make decisions for you if you can't. And that's what a power of attorney allows: somebody else to make all legal decisions for you except healthcare decisions. And the healthcare proxy allows somebody to make a healthcare decision for you. As Frank and Mary actually, in this situation, don't even need a will. They don't even really need, if their estate plan is that when one dies, it all goes to the other one, and if both of them die, it all goes to their kids. Well, that's what happens, actually, if you don't have a will. That's what the rules of intestacy are, the rules that would apply to you if you don't have a will. And they don't affect you until you're dead. These documents affect you while you're alive. So these are the 2 things. So I urge you, talk to your attorney. These are very, very inexpensive documents to get done, right? And everybody should have them. Now, I often talk to people who are also concerned about asset restructuring, because they're concerned about Alzheimer's. I'm going to talk about that at the end, but just as a preview, the moral of the story is, if you're Frank and Mary, and you've got their assets, you really don't have to do all kinds of advanced planning and all this other stuff. What you need to do is you need to keep yourself in shape, right? And do all of the things that you can do to reduce the chance that you might get Alzheimer's. So we've talked about the fact that Medicare doesn't cover this. The people who really can help you in terms of figuring out this issue are the folks at the Alzheimer's Association. And as I've said, in many ways, this program is an ad for the Alzheimer's Association, because I think for my clients who are so worried about this, I can help them in the short run. But in the long run, the real issue is to figure out the drugs that can help slow this thing down so that dementia doesn't kick in until you're 105, at which point, well, you know, who cares, right? And also to help you and those you love at the time that someone has actually got Alzheimer's, and that's really what the Alzheimer's Association is about. So, Shelby Marshall.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to represent the Alzheimer's Association as a member of the partnership through Worcester. Fundamentally, Alzheimer's Association is a wonderful, largely untapped resource that you all have access to. And it's a resource that you can access very independently on your own time through alz.org, as you can see here on the screen, or through calling the office at any time. It's a vast resource, not enough time to go into tonight, but they have a number of workshops, caregiver groups, coping groups, so a tremendous resource for you, for your loved ones, as well as for neighbors and friends, and I encourage you to check them out online.
With Frank and Mary, with Frank and Mary, yeah.
Frank, hurry, Mr. Bergeron's on. Don't forget the popcorn, Frank.
Coming, dear.
So we're going to go through some statistics because every slideshow should at least have some, but these are really important, and they're important for a couple of reasons, because I think sometimes we think about the other disease states that Arthur mentioned in terms of heart disease and cancer, and sort of we know someone, probably our neighbor or someone in our family who is affected with those diseases, but I think sometimes we don't appreciate how many people are actually affected with in various stages of Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, and this is not meant to be a downer, it's just sort of reality of where we're at. And as we live longer and longer, these statistics continue to go up. But more than 5 million Americans have Alzheimer's. If you can believe it, it was only about 100 years ago that Alzheimer's was first identified and recognized, and a mere 21 years ago when the first drug, Cognex, came out to actually treat some of the symptoms. So it's a relatively new sort of disease, if you will, in terms of its discovery, in terms of resources being dedicated to finding a cure, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Many of you probably remember one of our famous and maybe our best, that's my bias, President Reagan. 20 years ago, he announced that he had Alzheimer's, and that was just 20 years ago. So it really has sort of, through awareness of individuals like himself, have really sort of brought this to the forefront. One of the important, if you can just go back for a moment, Arthur, thanks. One of the important pieces here too, and I'll elaborate on this in the next slide, is that Alzheimer's is very much a family disease, in that the family is very, very involved typically in caring for the loved one. It's a very intensive disease to treat and sort of stay ahead of, and we'll talk about the actual numbers, but over 15 million people in the United States actually care or somehow identify themselves as a caregiver for individuals with Alzheimer's dementia. Next slide. Medicare, Medicaid, although they don't pay for a lot of things, to Arthur's point, they do allocate dollars or account for dollars that go toward treating individuals with Alzheimer's. So even though they might not treat Alzheimer's, if you fall because you were in an unsafe situation and you fracture your hip, those dollars there, the $150 billion, are sort of accounted for in those numbers. So when you sort of think about long-term care, a lot of money in this country is being paid for with state and federal monies to treating this disease.
And by the way, most of those Medicaid dollars are nursing home dollars. Yes. As I always mention to clients who are so embarrassed that they might have to qualify for Mass Health, oh my God, And I said, well, it's over 70% of all the people in all the beds in all the nursing homes are on Medicaid now. So most of these dollars are Medicaid dollars.
And women are really at the center of these statistics. And I should pause and say it's so refreshing to see such a diverse group here tonight of all ages, because it's really important that you sort of understand that, and you'll, it's wonderful to really see the diverse group. But women are really at the center of the Alzheimer's statistics. 1 in 6 women in the United States in her 60s is likely to have Alzheimer's, and actually 1 in 11 will have breast cancer. And so when I first saw that statistic, I was like, really? Because I can think of so many people that, you know, have been affected by breast cancer, but when you sort of, again, think of the numbers, it's just, it's more common than, unfortunately, we want to think about. And women are 2.5 times more likely than men to be considered intensive caregivers. And that sort of follows maybe sort of with logic, right? Women tend to be more nurturing. No offense to any of the wonderful gentlemen in the crowd, but it sort of tends to fall toward women, whether it be the wife, the daughter, the grandchildren, the sister, the aunt, what have you. It just sort of is the nature of that. And so what does that really mean? There's an impact there on lost wages, productivity, stress in the marriage, stress, maybe loss of a job, impact on the economy, and it really has a spiral effect, if you will. Next slide, please. So about Alzheimer's, I'm not going to go into sort of the clinical background of sort of in the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. That's not really the intention here. It's really to give you sort of a broad scope view. But it is progressive. There, unfortunately, today is no cure, and we'll talk about sort of how do you make yourself part of the solution. But Alzheimer's is a progressive disease. It comes with emotional and mental changes and physical ones as well. It's not reversible, but you can do things. Actually, Cindy was kind enough to give us raisin cookies. So have the raisin, not the chocolate chip tonight, because that will actually, yeah. Yeah. Actually, cinnamon, the Mediterranean diet, there are things out there, again, alzheimers.org, that can help you today. It's sort of, I don't want to say it's common sense, but for all of us, right, better living, you live longer, healthier joints, bones, head, all of that, it sort of follows. But it really is about a healthier lifestyle, and that's sort of the only, if you will, common sense cause of prevention right now. There are 5 drugs currently on the market. None of them actually treat the disease. What they do is they treat the symptoms. So Cognix is one of the drugs I mentioned. It came out back in 1993. I mean, I'll just name a couple of them because sort of you may say, oh yeah, I've heard of that. Aricept, Razidine, Namenda, and Exelon, those are all drugs, and they treat individuals at various stages during the disease. The sad part about these drugs is that they typically, the statistics say that they treat individuals for 6 to 12 months and have efficacy in half of the individuals for that period of time. So, you know, it's sort of, it really is working with individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia symptoms. It's a very delicate, if you will, cocktail mix in terms of their medication regimen. And it's a constant balance of making sure that balance is right. Next slide. So the early warning signs of Alzheimer's are here. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but I do want to just give you a moment just to look at them.
And once again, we're going to be talking a lot about this in the second seminar, because we're going to be talking about how these relate to whether or not, because these are symptoms, there could be symptoms of a lot of stuff, but are also symptoms of Alzheimer's. So the question is at that point, kind of, how do you figure it? We're going to talk about kind of what doctors you can talk to, the role of geriatric care managers, a number of other things.
And I think what's important here is that, again, for those of you touched with this, you know, for those not touched with this, sort of it's a slide. Okay, that kind of makes sense. For those of you touched with this, you can appreciate things like a simple list of, honey, do these 3 things while I'm gone. Take the laundry out, get the mail from the mailbox, and put the dishes in the sink. Become incredibly, incredibly difficult for an individual that was Alzheimer's. And that's not to say it's someone, you know, sort of in the mild to moderate Alzheimer's stage. We actually provide a sort of an experiential tour where we actually put people sort of in sort of gown you up and sort of put you in the shoes of someone that has that experience. And for individuals with Alzheimer's, it can be physically painful. People have neuropathy, so walking is hard. Their vision is impaired. They're sort of spatially, it's very difficult to sort of define where's the table, where's the, you know, there can be double vision. It's a very, very confusing emotional disease, and that causes isolation. it causes fear. So if you're an individual that is experiencing these things, you know, sort of it's not uncommon for individuals to sort of not want to talk about it, right? Because what's going to happen? They're going to send me for a test, and then I'm going to be taken out of my home, and then, you know, I'm not going to be Frank or Mary, right? But it is, early treatment is very important to manage the symptoms. The positive is, and I know this from sort of the day job, as Arthur mentioned, is that keeping your mind mentally stimulated on a regular basis is very important. And whether that's sort of going to the museum or reading books or painting or singing, all of those activities for individuals that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's are very important. So sort of sitting sedentary and standing at the TV, as I tell my dad all the time, shut that thing off. Get out and, you know, get some fresh air, talk with some friends, go golfing, play bocce, do whatever you want to do, but you got to get out there and be physically active and mentally active. The isolation is just really important. People develop a fear. They develop a fear, I fell once. If I fall again, I remember my daughter said, we can't keep dealing with this, right? We've got to get some help, or we gotta get you someplace where you won't fall, because I just kind of can't keep running home to help you, mom or dad, because I'm too scared, and on and on and on. So the signs are there. They're very real. And the key, as Arthur will, when you sort of the carrot, if you will, to the next session is, how do you cope with them? How do you cope with them as a loved one and help someone?
Because it is so hard. So many of my clients, as I always say, the hard part about Alzheimer's is other diseases are diseases. Alzheimer's is an embarrassment. It's not kind of acknowledged to be a disease. It's just, oh, I can't believe. And as a result, so often with spouses, of course you take care of your spouse, and you don't want your spouse to be embarrassed, just like you don't want to be embarrassed. And so all of a sudden you stop visiting anybody. You stop, you know, you don't want your kids to come over. Oh, how are things? You know, the kid's calling from Colorado. Oh, fine, everything's fine, we're good, right? It's so hard, where actually the socialization that comes from getting out actually slows down the dementia.
With Frank and Mary, Eldorado, with Frank and Mary, yeah.
Frank, hurry, Mr. Bergeron's on. Don't forget the popcorn, Frank.
Coming, dear.
There's just a lot of evidence of that. So once again, we'll talk about that some more.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good example of the call from Colorado. I think that that isolation is, you know, I just, from seeing families on a day-to-day basis that struggle with this, it just really sort of can govern sort of how decisions are made. And I don't know why it is, but sometimes families are, you know, have a diagnosis of, or someone's in the hospital, had a massive heart attack, had quadruple bypass surgery, or someone has cancer, and everyone's sort of at the door with pies and what can I make you? And then, you know, Alzheimer's is one of those, it's kind of like, I'm ashamed. Like, my husband's not showering anymore. Ooh, you know, he's not social. My wife, you know, isn't social with her friends anymore. So again, not here to paint a totally dim picture, but it's an appreciation for someone next to you maybe going through that, and you know, to have an open mind about that. Next slide. So what is sort of the upside of this, right? And how do you get involved? I mentioned that in the first couple slides. So the Alzheimer's Association has created this great program called Trial Match. I mentioned that Alzheimer's does not currently have a cure. The challenging thing with finding a cure is that you need clinical trials. In order to have clinical trials, you need people that want to be in clinical trials. So the Alzheimer's Association, along with many leading institutions, Boston University being one of them locally here, very involved in getting people involved in clinical trials, obviously appropriate, you know, to meet the clinical trial stage. You should never enter into a clinical trial without a discussion with your physician. But the beautiful thing about Trial Match is the following, is that it is a free confidential service. It's sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association, so there's credibility behind it. It contains a database of publicly available funded clinical trial sources. I was going to sort of show it, but you can't see it on my smartphone. If you go to the, if you do just Google trial match, it comes right up, and it really walks you through a very simple sort of what do you do in terms of how do I get involved in trial match? And it literally starts with a phone call or a simple questionnaire online. And then there's, you complete the questionnaire, and then behind the scenes, it's sort of like, eHarmony or Match.com. They're going to match you with sort of what's your, what would be an appropriate clinical trial. And then if you give them permission, them meaning trial match, to contact you, then an individual from Trial Match will contact you and provide you information on the available trials.
And that's the most important thing. And by the way, I forgot to bring the little forms that they actually have so that you can actually fill out the forms and submit them to the Alzheimer's Association. If you fill out the form, that is simply saying that you are willing to talk to somebody to see if you'd be interested in participating and if they'd like you to participate in one of their trials. But it's really important. There are, I want to say nationally, there are only about 20, there are a little over 20 centers of Alzheimer's research because it's Boston. And we have 2 of them in Boston. Partners and BU are both centers that get extensive funding. These doctors also get extensive funding, by the way, from the Alzheimer's Association. I was at a presentation that they did about 3 weeks ago where the researchers who are being funded by the Alzheimer's Association to the tunes of millions of dollars were talking about the research that they had actually done. One of them actually directly related to the trial match program, because it had, until recently, it had been that in order to find out whether you have Alzheimer's before you demonstrate the symptoms, before you have the dementia, they could find out, but you had to do a test that really involved, it was a very expensive test. It was like an MRI through which they could see whether some aspects of your brain had deteriorated, and therefore you'd be a likely candidate for doing more testing because you were likely to get dementia in 3 years or 5 years. This one woman with research money funded by the Alzheimer's Association has now come up with a drug, right? Basically, something that you can take, and then they can take a blood sample based on what you've taken, which will allow them to figure all of that out without your having to go through an MRI, which is this extreme, so it makes it'll now make the research much less expensive because it'll make figuring out who can participate much less expensive. So there's a lot of those examples. So we'll bring cards next time. If you contact that number, you can also sign up, you can sign up online.
Absolutely. And I think, again, just, we, as Arthur mentioned in the beginning, in terms of funding and resources, clinical trials won't necessarily pay for someone to come to your home, but they may. Clinical trials are always, evolving and developing, but it really is about drug research, and it's a wonderful, wonderful service. Again, it's free, and, I encourage anyone to take advantage of it or to contact.
Right. And we're trying to get enough people to sign up from this area so that, as Shelby has suggested, typically, to this point, people have had to go to Boston to participate in the trials. Well, that's a hassle, right? So we really, but if there is enough base here for folks who are participating, we can get them to kind of come to us, which would really be ideal.
The next slide, please. So again, I think we've just covered this, that the goal is really to increase the number of trial matches, to increase the number of enrollees. Again, without clinical trials, there's no one to actually participate in the research itself. And the goal of Trial Match really is to provide the public with information on the progression of the disease and resources available to treat it. It's sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association. Again, I just want to reiterate that. It's not some sort of private entity. It is the Alzheimer's Association and backed by a very credible organization.
Yeah, this is one of those weird ads,
Yeah,
participate in a drug trial.
Right. And it's
We're our new super product, this isn't that, right? This is this is real.
Right, and again, just to reiterate, the giving someone permission to reach out to you is not sort of and I'm going to call you and I'm going to call you again. It's a very professional, very personal relationship that is developed through Trial Match. Okay.
Shelby, thank you very much. And by the way, I didn't mention at the beginning, if you've got questions as we go along, please hold them. We're going to have time for questions at the end. Now, I'd like to have you hear about all those folks who hadn't or who had but didn't know all the things they do. Mary Beth Frayne, I did that wrong. Mary Frayne Johnston.
Mary Frayne Johnston.
My memory is going. So to really talk about BayPath and to give you a sense kind of from her perspective of what's available. And you should know BayPath is like very local. Their offices are right on Route 20 in Marlborough.
Right.
So to learn more, Mary Frayne.
I'm Mary Frayne Johnston. I've been a case manager at BayPath for about 7 years. And during that time, I've dealt with a number of families who are dealing with someone, helping to care for someone in their family with Alzheimer's disease. It is one of the most heart-rending situations that we do see. I've had a client who thought her middle-aged children were still in high school, and she was perfectly coiffed and well-dressed and driving around town with this misconception. I've had other clients who very tenderly took care of their spouse for 10 years in the home, doing the full range of care that you can imagine that one has to care for someone whose capabilities are declining. So we're here to help in these situations because very often there may be no children, there may be children who live far away, there are children who are very preoccupied by their own needs to earn a living and take care of their own families. And typically what we'll see in the case of where there's someone dealing with Alzheimer's disease is people wait and struggle with the disease and all its ramifications on their own before they come to us. And so if I could urge you to do any one thing today, it's write down our number. It's 508-573-7200. We have a website, baypath.org. And you can call us at any time and speak to one of our information and referral specialists who can tell you about our programs.
And by the way, we're going to have this on cable, on local cable, and we'll put a banner for other folks who want to see this at the end of the program so that they can get that.
It's 508-573-7200. And you want to ask to speak to the information and referral department, someone in the information and referral department. We have a wide range of programs, so you don't have to start off with the most intensive programs BayPath offers. We do offer a variety of free or low-cost workshop-style programs on things like chronic disease management, chronic pain management. We also and those programs generally last about 6 to 8 weeks and are about 2.5 hours, and they take place in various locations in the community. So that's one place to start. We also offer a caregiver program, which is currently in transition, but we have offered support groups through that program. And I have sat in on a couple of those sessions. They're very illuminating. When you get to the point where you feel you need services, we do offer a range of home care services to help people stay in their homes as long as possible. And those services usually start out with a basic package of about 3 hours a week or $300 a month of services, which can include things like light housekeeping, which would include grocery shopping, personal care, to help someone with their shower, a day or two at an adult day health facility, which can give the elder with the Alzheimer's disease or other afflictions an opportunity to socialize while giving his or her caregiver a chance for a little respite.
And by the way, how much do those services cost again?
The services are, you pay, there's a sliding fee depending on your income.
And if your income is low enough, you pay nothing at all.
If you're on Mass Health or your income is very low, you would pay nothing.
But the main thing is to understand, even if you're not on Mass Health, there is this myth that these services are only available if you're on Mass Health. In other words, if you have no assets.
Yeah,
and that's not the case. There are state-funded programs that, once again, are administered through BayPath that can provide you with a certain level of services at home, either for free or really for a very small copay.
For a nominal fee. I mean,
Right.
I had a client who was making about $23,000, and her copay was going to be $83 a month. And that's sort of on the high end for our clients, but even once you hit the respite over income category, which is when your income climbs a little bit, you know, that would start off at 50% of the cost of the services, which is about $150 a month.